everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Loffers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, quarterly magazine, and a bi-weekly newsletter. And I'm also the Chief Analyst of the Maturity Matrix of Supply Chain Startups and Scale-Ups. And that's also the topic of today. We're going to talk about supply chain innovation, especially coming from startups. So next to me, I have three excellent experts. You see me on the left-hand side without any glasses. And next, Matthias Bosse, he's founding partner of Preco Ventures. Matthias, welcome.
Hi, Martin. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me.
All right, and we'll talk about later the background and what you are doing in this business. And next to him, we have Peter Schram. He's a founder of Breakthrough Advisory. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Martijn. Nice to be here.
And with Peter, we created a series of articles about the implementation of startup solutions at companies. So we'll talk about that later on. And last but not least, we have Simon Schenke, founder and co-CEO of Genlots. Hi, Simon.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
And we also have a further introduction about Genlots and their applications in the market. So some practical stuff. This webinar will be recorded and the PDF will be made available afterwards. The whole audience is on mute, so we have a nice audience. We have about 100 registrations. You can ask questions either using the chat functionality and everybody can see and respond to that, or, and I prefer that way, ask the Q&A functionality on the right-hand side. You see the text bubbles on the right-hand side, so use this functionality to ask questions. And if these questions are related to the conversation I will be having with the three experts, I will ask these questions immediately. If not, we will reserve these questions to the end, the Q&A part of this 1 hour webinar. And if you are still having questions and you want a direct conversation, so we also have an extra 30 minutes afterwards. So we will be in the lounge at table 1. So the four of us will be sitting in table 1, and when you click on a chair, a Zoom meeting, it will be popping up, and you can have a direct conversation with the four of us. So as of now, we will put off the camera for a few reasons. Base bandwidth, one thing, but also you can enlarge your screen to have a better view on the slides. So you have, you can follow the slides better. So, okay. So first, Matthias, so can you give me some better background on Preco Ventures? So what are you doing?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. So my name is Matthias. With Preco Ventures, we have started a focus fund for supply chain and logistic tech companies in Europe. So basically investing into these startups at their earliest stages. Normally it's their first or second financing round. And we look at pretty much everything from sourcing to procurement to last mile and everything that happens in between, and try to find the most promising teams and technologies to invest in from an investor's perspective. Before we did that, or even to do that, we started also our own small insights platform, as we call it, which is kind of in its core a database monitoring the supply chain eco and logistics tech startup ecosystem in Europe. And by doing so, we collect a lot of data around these companies and try to monitor them and detect them as early as possible. Currently, we have 493 startups in that database. We are focusing very much on Europe and segmenting it into 16 different segments. And we use these data also not only for us to find promising startups and also to track and trace them to a certain extent, but also do a lot of content and provide a bit of overview on that ecosystem. And once a year, we do a big report, which is formerly known as the Supply Chain Management Startup Handbook. We have rebranded a little bit to focus more on supply chain tech. And the idea of this report is really to have kind of once a year, the state of the ecosystem in supply chain and logistics tech. But again, so we're a venture capital investment fund, so we try to invest as early as possible into the most promising teams and technologies.
Yeah. So we did a similar stuff at Supply Chain Media. We followed the supply chain startup since 2018. So we have our European supply chain startup and scale-up contest since 2018, and we are doing similar stuff. So, but we are in close contact with each other, Matthias. So we are exchanging data in a sense of what we are seeing. Yeah, you have also a focus this year on Gen AI, but in general, can you tell us a bit more about this year's supply chain tech report?
Yes, sure. So the idea of the report, as I said, is mainly two things. One is kind of to describe the ecosystem of startups which are dealing with supply chain and logistics challenges. To describe the ecosystem, to describe companies, list them, try to make people aware of which companies are out there and what they are doing, and maybe also how advanced they already are. And then we also do more kind of focused articles and research on certain topics. And this year, the topic was kind of easy to choose because everyone was talking about AI and Gen AI. So we decided to focus on the question: okay, how can generative AI contribute to logistics and supply chain challenges? So what you will find in this report is kind of an analysis. What are the applications and use cases that are most promising for applying Gen AI technologies? That's partly research done by us, so by my co-founder Marcus and myself. And also we did interview a number of experts in the case, how they see it, where they see the struggles and hurdles, how to implement these technologies and what needs to be done and what can already be achieved with Gen AI. So we have identified 6 use cases. For each of these use cases, we have profiled and 3 startups as examples how to use startups and their technologies to make use of generative AI. And the main part, or the second part of this report, is, as I said, the description of the ecosystem as a whole. We have 459 startups in total listed in the company, segmented in the report, segmented into the 16 segments, as mentioned earlier. And for this year, we then also have identified for each of these segments a number of startups that we think are especially noteworthy in the sense of that they have either very breakthrough technologies or have made great traction with their companies. So there are 80 companies profiled in a bit more detail, but the whole list of startups with some basic information.
Yeah. So how did you choose these 80 startups? Is it from an investment perspective or also from a possible customer perspective?
Yeah, it's both, I would say. So as I said, we have a number of segments, and we try to pick at least a number of startups for each segment, so that everyone who's interested in some, to a certain extent, in supply chain and logistics can find some interesting material in it. And I think it's partly from an investment perspective, of course, because there were companies we think are great teams, companies from which we know that they have developed a quite good product and make good traction also commercially. And on the other hand, we also went through these interviews with a number of experts and also had their opinion on who's out there, who has impressing products and where they see potential, and also listed or described companies, partly also very young, where we see that they have really great potential from their product or technology-wise, not yet from the commercial perspective maybe, but from a customer and user perspective.
Yeah, and you mentioned you have identified 16 segments. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about how they develop.
Yeah, sure. So when we started to do our small database, or in the meantime not so small database, we segmented supply chain and logistics as we understood it into 16 different areas, and each and every startup kind of names a main segment, either by their own or as we identify them, because part of this database is fed by these startups by the startups themselves, so everyone can register and make a profile and describe the company. We did this now for the third time, so the report for the third time. We started building the database in 2019. At the very beginning, freight and shipping and all the digital freight forwarding models, etc., were kind of the predominant category. In the meantime, you can see that things like supply chain, visibility, procurement, compliance have really catched up, and really, a huge number of startups has been founded in that areas over the last years, I would say. What we also see that is within these categories and within the applications, companies become much more sophisticated in the technology they use. So I think the first wave of supply chain and logistics startups was pretty much digitizing an already existing process, which maybe was not so digital in the first place, and kind of recreate the old process in a digital way. In the meantime, it's much more sophisticated in terms of technologies that are used. We have seen it on one of the later points, maybe. So it's becoming much more techier, I would say, in a sense that also the founders are then much stronger in terms of tech skills.
Yeah, and you mentioned, in the early phase, I call it the Uber phase. You had the Uber for freight forwarding, and the Uber of warehouse capacity. So that was probably easy to sell to investors, but under the hood there was not much complexity and not intelligence around it. And now we have evolved, I would say, from the Uber phase to the more the complex phase of applications. And maybe you can also explain in this slide how some categories have evolved and have grown.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, so we take a closer look at these data once a year, at least for the report. And I think what has become very clear over the last years, that there's a significant difference before COVID and after COVID, or before 2020 and after 2020. So what sticks out among others is two categories that are kind of really get more attention from founders, and also at least partly already from investors. One is very clear. So sustainability and compliance is really the strongest growing category among all these startups, in both dimensions, so to say, in as well in startups, in numbers of companies founded, but also in funding. And I think that's mainly due to not only the bigger awareness and shifting consumer demands on the sustainability side, but also as a result of the huge regulatory pressure and steps that has been taken by different countries and the EU, etc., etc. So there's a strongly growing number of solution providers in that area. And this is going to continue in 2024, I would say. What we also see, given these, especially in the sustainability and compliance segment, there's not so much, or there are companies that are kind of claiming in general that they can solve these solutions. Normally, these companies are kind of promising maybe too much on to a certain extent. What we see is that there's a growing number of companies that are really focusing on certain verticals, right? So certain supply chains of certain products, certain industries, really verticalized solutions that are understanding one problem or understanding the supply chain and the problems within that supply chain for one certain segment of an industry very well, and design a product around that, and maybe then later translate it into other industries, but not so much do kind of the general approach, we can solve your supply chain problem. That's kind of good as we see it, because it allows really a very targeted go-to-market.
But what we have seen in the last few years, Sweep from France has raised 100 million euros in funding, and that's amazing. And TrustTrace is catching up, but also tens of millions of funding, so that they are in the area of carbon accounting, based on the need for CSRD to do your scope 3 carbon accounting. So that's massive, and that the investors are flooding money in that area. But also you see in the sustainability is also the rise of product passports. Do you know your bill of material? Where are all your parts and raw materials coming from? So the slightly different area. So even in sustainability, we have in our overview dissected this different flavors of sustainability. So you see also within this segments you see evolvements and specialization.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, and you mentioned generative AI is a focus point of this report. What can you tell us about Gen AI in the startup area?
Yeah, so I think so for sure. So in any case, it's a big hype. It's a big hype. Maybe taking a step back, what we did or what we always do every year is kind of asking the startups also to identify the the technologies they use within their products and which are the most relevant parts of their tech stack, so to say. And what has become really clear is that AI in general and associated technologies like machine learning and big data management are kind of at the core of most of these startups companies. For sure, being a tech investor, we rather look at the digital or on the software kind of startups. So this is and there we can say, okay, AI plays a major role, and not only from a marketing buzzword perspective, because no one creates a pitch deck these days without mentioning generative AI, but also in really having a closer look at their technologies. A lot of them really apply these things. I think there will be a next wave of startups upcoming that are really then creating even more business specific AI solutions, because what we now saw over the last months is a big hype on generative AI, and everyone is experimenting with this and trying it out and has a potential use case in mind. But there are not yet too many startups that have really a product designed around Gen AI solving a very specific business solution. I think that's in the making already. So we are approached by a number of potential founders already planning to bring up these products and startups. So I think the overarching technology is super good. And really has lowered the hurdle to implement and use generative AI in the business context. But it's also very mighty tools that are not easy to deploy and also not too cheap to deploy these days. So there will be more tailored versions containing only the parameters you would really need and to build a business to solve a specific business problem.
Yeah, we have seen it last year. We did a webinar with Garvis from Belgium, a scale-up now being sold lately to Logility. They created a chatbot, a Gen AI chatbot within the application. So you, even if you are not trained in this application, you can ask this chatbot questions about what will this promotion doing to my sellout, etc. So that's one application. Another one is using scraping technology and Gen AI kind of tools to see what kind of possible disruptions are happening in the world outside and will impact my supply chain network. These are the things developing, and Pre-Wave is in that area, and also Ames is doing that, but also Rift Methods now being acquired by Sphera. So you see the Gen AI in the outside world and inside your tooling. So these are the two versions we have been seeing. But the next step would be that you let Gen AI write code tailored to the customer, but that would require specific data points, very clean data to create something specialized for you.
Yeah, agree, and I think that's a very, very interesting also view and perspective that one could then kind of maybe to a certain extent buy standard software and customize it then by let the product create the code itself. I think it still would require a lot of know-how and competence within each company to really make the right prompts, right, and let the software work into the right direction. But as you said, so I think that's one of that's the next potential step to create a product around this, right? So make it as easy as possible for everyone to use the software and to customize it to the individual needs.
And what I see, what the biggest potential is to adapt or to extract data from certain applications, TMS, WMS, etc., in such a way that you can make sense of the supply chain network, and you can see correlations, and you see more on top of that. Some companies are using our Power BI, but I think that on that meta level, I think there's a huge need to use a new kind of technology, and then you can use AI. But then you get also in the area or the area of error technology, difficult to pronounce. Anyway, but so there are some areas in that area developing. Getting back to the investment, maybe you can tell us a bit more about where you see investments happening, Matthias.
Yeah, so I think this is also something we, of course, regularly look at. So this is kind of here an analysis of all the funding that goes into went into the startups we looked at. So it's not kind of one slice per year, but it's the total amount of funding. And I think what this also shows, as we said earlier. So I think in the first wave, there was a lot of money being invested in the, as you call it, Uber phase kind of startups, and a lot of them also already then try to evolve into more software-driven companies. In terms of categories, we can clearly see that the categories mentioned earlier, sustainability, compliance, supply chain visibility, has really catched up a lot, right? So a lot of money has been invested into these categories and still is. So it's not that's not over it. Those companies are really, some of them, not all of them, are kind of strongly growing, but still more money is being invested into these segments. What's not so on the agenda of investors yet, I would say, but still to come, are tools around planning, forecasting, etc., etc. So I think a lot of investors will turn to that segment as well. But all in all, it's kind of a matter of a question of time when the more technical startups will have bigger fundings than the kind of old models. So I think there's for sure, as in all startup categories these days, there's a bit of a limited pace of investing. So investors are more hesitant, and the bar for startups to raise money has really risen due to higher interest rates, etc., and more kind of uncertainties around the globe. But so still, investors are very interested into this area, and it's not only the venture capital investments. I also recently talked to a big M&A consultancy firm, and they have also a lot of interest of private equity funds into acquiring supply chain and logistics companies. So I think all in all, this category in terms of investment is still growing super strongly. And that's also due to the last years where a lot of companies and the society in general, I would say, has become aware of how important supply chain and logistics is for our daily lives. For us as an investor, it's a good thing, I would say. So we are very happy to be in that space.
Yeah, I had a conversation earlier today. Two founders of a new supply chain software startup, coming from a big multinational, well-known names. I won't mention it, but anyway. But he confirmed, this founder, that a lot of companies, using supply chain tools. But then again, in the end, they extract the data and they work in Excel. So in supply chain planning, and a lot of the data is still being used in Excel, and that's not sustainable. So that's the reason why this market is very, very fruitful and very hot to get into, because we have to get rid of Excel, because that's not sustainable, because you don't know how you created this Excel, and if the one who has created this very bright Excel is leaving, well, you're screwed anyway. So basically, that's the reason why a lot of startups in this field are coming in, because they want to, replace the not sustainable Excels. So we have also created an overview, and this the latest one. Maybe we'll update it even in the next month, because we see when we publish this, we will see some changes, and some startups will say, I'm missing, or you placed me in the wrong category. To explain it from left to right. Left is the supplier side, and the right side is the customer side, and all in between. So you see the procurement sourcing side on totally on the left. And in the green area, you see the carbon accounting, what we called sustainability last year, but now we renamed it in carbon accounting. And you see also the unit of measure below. What are we talking about? And go to right, you see ocean and air freight forwarding. The Fortos of this world, that's the Uber area, and they are already too old. They are older than 2019, so they are launched before 2019. And totally on the right side, you see, we used to end up with last mile delivery, but now you see a new category popping up called returns management. So after last mile, you have delivered to the door of your customer. Now you're getting your stuff back, and that's a hassle. So now you also see some startups over there, and even ones who are already older than 2019. And you see the green dotted line, and that's our distinction between startups and scale-ups, and that's based on the funding. If you are funded more than 2 million, we consider you a scale-up, but also on age, number of employees, etc. And is it pre-seed, seed, A, B series funding, that kind of stuff. And you see on the green area, Sweep, massively funded with 100 million euro. And in the blue area, mentioned also by Matthias, you see demand planning and forecasting. And if people ask me, I also the creator of the IT Supermap Europe. So with SNLP, WMS, TMS, etc. Where do you see application of machine learning and AI? And I say, machine learning is basically mainly applied in demand planning and forecasting. Why? Because that's a homogeneous environment where you can use this data and learn from statistics from your demand, etc. So that's what we see where it's happening in the demand and planning and forecasting. And a lot of appetite over there, both from the customers, also from investors. What you see also, asset tracking. We used to have a blockchain category, but now we merged it into asset tracking and tracing because blockchain as such was promising and it's being applied, but it's changing. So basically, we created this overview for the users because as mentioned by Matthias, he has a database with over 400 startups. Quite hard to get into if you're not if you don't know what you're looking for. But now you see here are some names where you can see which one are worthwhile following. Peter, if you look at this, because we have created a whole series of articles, what's your take on this kind of overview? So what is it saying? Because you are advising companies to innovate and to apply it in supply chain.
Yeah, so I think a good question, Martijn. So I think kind of what I'm seeing is at least there's a lot of different startups in let's say different segments, as you call it over here. And I will also show later that kind of we have interviewed, let's say, customers of these kind of startups, and that really big organizations are using, let's say, companies or startups, let's say, also from these different segments into the improvement of their supply chain. So there's a lot out there, and it seems that to be growing, but there seems to be also a lot of big organizations who kind of start to collaborate, let's say, on a broad range of topics with startups.
Yeah, and when you look at the flags of the countries, Matthias, we're seeing startups from all over Europe. You also have an overview in your report. Where are these startups coming from? From which countries? From which cities? And maybe you're a bit Germany biased, but what do you see? Where are the hot spaces in supply chain startups in Europe?
I don't know what you mean with bias. No, just joking. No, for sure. So we have an overview on kind of from which countries are these companies coming from, and I think a huge number is actually coming from really DACH, so German, Austria, Switzerland. But I think closely followed up by in the meantime the UK, and surprisingly often we Switzerland. I think those are the three major countries, I would say, at least from the data we have collected in the report. But I have to say that so there are also great companies coming from the rest of Europe, right? So I think our reach isn't the best in the eastern part of Europe, to be very transparent on this one. But I think besides this, also great companies from Spain, France, Scandinavia. But I think the two biggest countries are still Germany and the UK.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What we did since 2020, we asked the startups. So we asked probably 200 startups about their commercial pipeline. So we asked them, are you visible enough in the media? What does your commercial pipeline look like? Potential customers doing a pilot. What are your prospects? Are you able to convert them into contracts? Are you able to collaborate with industry partners? How unique is your solution? And they still think, they are very unique. And basically, you need to say that, otherwise you won't get any money. But when you look closely, I see a lot of companies who are in the same category. So in that sense, I think, they are not so unique. And in 2022, they had a hard time finding employees. 2022. For the rest, it was quite green. Easy to attract new funding was relatively green. 2022, and international expansion was also on green. But 2023 changed a bit. So they said, lower visibility. Commercial pipeline was still good, but industry partners had other things on their mind. Still, it was hard to attract new employees, and it was very hard to attract new funding, basically on the interest rates going up. International expansion was still green, and now the latest, it's getting green again. So you see all the things compared to last year. It's the traffic lights are on green again, and easiness to attract new money is on orange, from green from red last year to orange, and international expansion is a bit hard. Matthias, what is your take on this traffic light overview?
So it really gives me hope, especially the commercial aspect of it. That's really good to see that companies are more optimistic again on this side. What we see is that for sure we can kind of still confirm that the funding environment maybe got a bit better than 2023, but it's still hard, and I think a lot of investors are still hesitant to invest. At least the requirements to do so have risen a lot. I'm not sure what to make from what to take from the international expansion thing. To a certain extent, I think we can confirm that our impression is not in all segments, but in some segments, that there is a tendency for kind of local champions, and that a lot of some companies doing pretty much the same stuff. Start in different countries, obviously, and then first and foremost take the home market, and then it becomes not easier to kind of scale that throughout Europe and in different countries and domains. So I think overall the main topic I read from this is also, okay, more focus on building commercial traction and trying to generate revenues as the most sustainable source of financing, because it's also getting still harder to get external funding.
Yeah, and Simon, I don't know if you have responded to this survey, but if you look at this overview, so with Genlot, so how do you see the market? Are you visible enough? So if you go down these 10 points, can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I cannot really comment on the funding as we are not raising, so I don't know how the environment is. I heard also that money is a little bit tighter.
Yeah.
But I would say on the customer side, I think Corona, it's the positive aspect was it gave a lot of visibility to supply chain, also from top management. So that's always good, because before kind of supply chain didn't really have a big IT budget besides the ERP. So there's more innovation happening there, but then for a long time, kind of supply chain was very busy with like all the supply chain issues that came up, and still all the time come up. Like most recently, again, kind of a Suez Canal and so on. So the people in the operations who then have to validate your solution, they're often busy. And now I feel like this year it looks a little bit better, right? Where you get on the one hand the attention, the willingness to innovate, but also the kind of capacity for the people on the ground, from the people on the ground.
And if you look, startups are in need for pilots, to get this application tested in a real life environment, and then again they hope to have a paid pilot, and then to deploy it. So what's your take? Is it easy for you to do pilots and get this pilot paid by your customers?
Yes, I think even you have to ask for payment for the pilots, because otherwise you risk being a kind of a side project, and it will lead nowhere. So I think this is also kind of a test for a startup to look if they're talking to the right person.
Yeah.
If there is some budget behind it, if there can be something unlocked for a kind of test phase.
And I when I talk to larger companies, some companies they have some sort of department scouting for startups, have already budget reserved for paid pilots. Other companies, they don't have innovation budget for this kind of projects or pilots. Do you also stumble upon these different kind of companies? Do you see some that already have this set up for you to do this pilot, and some don't? Or what is your take on that?
Yeah, it's a huge variety between companies. So some are really, focused on this innovation and also in supply chain. I
Hmm.
think as a marketing and sales company, maybe it's easier to get budget because they have kind of IT innovation software budget, whereas supply chain for a long time didn't. Afterwards, it really depends also on the timing and how you fit into their existing landscape and basically project roadmap,
Yeah.
because ideally you can attach to kind of an existing priority, to an existing kind of strategic initiative where there's budget for this initiative, and so a part can go into the pilot with you because if they have, for example, in our case, a rollout of one MRP across the whole world, and kind of unifying MRPs across the whole world,
Hmm.
then we can really easily fit inside this kind of already pre-existing project. So
Yeah,
that
I can
depends
imagine.
on how you position yourself.
Yes, and what I also experience when I look around, especially within bigger multinationals, some companies still have a centralized IT department, and 10 years ago that's quite common. 10, 20 years ago, especially when they have to implement the first phase of ERP around the millennium, etc. But in the last 5 to 10 years, you see more and more companies have a dedicated IT department for supply chain, and in a similar way to finance. But particularly when they have a dedicated sub department, IT department for supply chain, uh, these people inside this IT department for supply chain have a better understanding what the company really needs. And so in the old days, the IT department wasn't aware enough of the requirements within supply chain, so that was a challenge. And I think the more advanced companies have a dedicated IT department, and even the business or the supply chain will call off where to invest, what kind of application, what are the needs, etc. And so there are more and more in the driver's seats, and regarding IT, and not so much the IT department. So I was wondering, Peter, you're coming from the business, but also you worked at Gartner. Do you see similar uh, development? So is supply chain in the driver's seat to select IT, or is still IT in the driver's seat?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about that when you were asking me the question. So we are here on the same line. So if I look at the, I think, 8 interviews that we did last year, Martijn,
Hmm.
basically what you're seeing there, that's actually quite interesting, is that first of all, how did these big companies come into contact with the startups? That was not through innovation program, but very often through cold calls or through coincidence. Huh? So
Hmm.
that was not really a plan, and very often it was initiated by a supply chain director or supply chain responsible,
Hmm.
and very often specifically because they felt like it's very cumbersome to go to kind of traditional process, let's say with steering committees, if you want to go to a traditional software selection process.
Yeah.
So to your point, so yes, I do see in general sense that there is much more collaboration between supply chain and IT, yeah? And whether that leads to a separate IT department in supply chain, but at least there is, let's say, a much more tighter connection. But I think where supply chain people from the business side use startups for is they have a real life problem. They
Hmm.
want to solve it. They want to solve it quickly, and they can't really get through it very often through the traditional ways in the organization with IT, with all the standard ways of working.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. So here you have an overview, a sample of what you have been doing, creating these interviews. Maybe you can explain, line by line, what you have been seeing and what's your take on these cases.
Yeah, so kind of maybe the starting point of this, Martijn. So I think we started talking somewhere end of 2022, and I
Yep.
came a bit more from, let's say, the business perspective, saying, okay, well, we want to do supply chain transformation, and how can we do that more quickly, and
Yep.
how can we do that basically by using different technologies. And let's say over the last couple of years, I've also been working with startups who are sometimes struggling, let's say, more from the tech side. How can they make the connection between a good idea towards added value from for the organization that they work for?
Mhm.
So that's where we come with the idea to actually ask, let's say, these organizations on why did they start to work actually with startups, and what can we learn from that?
Yep.
So we started to talk to Saint-Gobain, and they were really struggling basically with, a much faster pace in their environment, but they need to, have a reaction. So the reaction time needed to be shorter. So that's why they started to work with Flowlity. We talked with Q8, where they saw due to COVID that their supply chain was never really unstable. It was also always very stable, and they needed to actually start to do demand planning, and they started to do that with Carvis. And then we also started to talk to AB InBev, and I think maybe Sam, you can even talk more about that. But really, they had a challenge on their packaging and materials, where that was never really seen as a really big issue, but because of hiring interest rate, that become kind of a more burning platform for change. We talked to Sika, where they, which is a company who does also chemicals for construction business, where they saw that they were doing all kind of location choice and all kind of takeovers, where they had to integrate it into their network, where they saw that they were not really fact-based and wanted to have more fact-based decision making. And we talked to a company called Ergo Baby, where they were also hit by all the things that we discussed at the beginning of the call. So the issues with the Suez channel, with supply chain disruptions, where they really had, let's say, a limited insight in the availability of their products, which they can sell, of course, to their network. So all different kind of reasons to work with startups, and they kind of all decided, let's say, to work with a startup to solve their issues. That's maybe a bit of the overall summary.
Yeah, but interesting to see on the left-hand side. You see the practical problems, the burning platform. Where does it hurt?
Yep.
And I think that it's quite cool that this is stated right here, because I get a lot of input, and Matthias has also received a lot of input from startups and scale-ups. And if we ask them, what is the problem you address? Most of the times it's quite vague and quite generic, lack of visibility, etc., and not so much very specified in what area does it hurt and how do you resolve it. For example, in a Flowlity with Saint-Gobain, they have a calculation and recommendation for two sister companies within Saint-Gobain, but also the tier one. So basically, they are doing supply chain planning for three parts of the chain of Saint-Gobain, where you have window tiles, etc. So that's a quite new kind of solution application for supply chain planning. So I think that a lot of startups are struggling to define what is the real problem you are solving. And on the other hand, the companies, the future companies, have a hard time to specify where does it really hurt and where do you need some solution.
Yeah, fully agree on that. So kind of what I'm seeing, let's say from my end. So if I look at these startups, and I've talked to many of them in the last couple of years, that they often have a very good idea, and it's sometimes a bit too much technology, let's say, driven.
Mm-hmm.
And some startups, and not all of them, but they find it difficult to basically move from a great idea into a must-have product for their customers, into a definition on which kind of market or what kind of segment they want to be in,
Yep.
but also how to sell that. So that's a bit kind of the three things that you have to solve as a startup to come kind of in that scale-up phase.
Yeah. They want to think big, but they have to start small, and then they have to deploy it. So Simon, over to you. So in the middle you see Genlots on one hand and AB InBev, a customer of yours, on one hand. Maybe you can explain a bit your background, and then explain what Genlots is bringing to the market.
Yeah, I would say we're already a bit of an older startup. We incorporated in 2017, and my role is normally more on the product and technical side, but I did also my fair share of project management with corporates.
Mm-hmm.
And our secret sauce, so to speak, is reinforcement learning algorithm. So old AI, I'm sorry, not Gen AI, but it optimizes when to order how much external materials for production. So that is basically where we are coming from. And I think since not too long ago, we're also an SAP partner, which is one form of, I think, innovation and startup collaboration, which we maybe can talk more about later.
And you mentioned here 40 plus pilots and global rollouts. If you look, how many global rollouts? So which part of the pilots are leading into global rollouts within your customers? Can you say something
I
about
would
that?
say, the jury is still out on a lot of them, because I think one of, you talked about IT and driver seat before.
Mhm.
I think one of the, we are very deeply integrating with the ERP. So we're taking information from the ERP, we're sending back, order requests.
Mhm.
And that means also that, a lot of companies, they're always in kind of a merger, or they have done an acquisition, they have a merger, or recently, for example, Novartis and Sandoz, they're going,
Yeah.
they're separating again, right? And
Yeah.
then you have at the moment also a transition to S4 in many companies. So with one of our clients, we already did a transition together with them to S4. So I would say there's also a question of timing in there. So I would say for a lot of them, the jury is still out. But I have two, I think, in a slide later, which I can talk about more in detail, where
Yeah.
I'm allowed to.
Yeah. And what is the basic problem you're solving? Maybe you can explain it with this triangle.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, everything started with a problem at the university. It's a well-known trilemma of the supply chain triangle. It
Yep.
states that supply organizations can maintain really a high level of service while lowering their working capital and optimizing their cost related to ordering, such as price and transport.
Yep.
And the result of those decisions are the total cost in the middle of the triangle.
Yep.
So an example is if you want to reduce your inventory, you order more frequently and in smaller quantities, which increases the delivery cost.
Mhm.
And so we optimize this with a combination of a new costing model and our proprietary reinforcement learning algorithm.
Mhm.
And this is a typical graph of GenLat's interface. So you see in green, you see the requirements, the future requirements. The gray bars show the orders placed by the current system, which is frequently SAP. And the
Yep.
blue bars are the suggestions that are placed by GenLats.
Yep.
And the lines correspond to the inventories of the plan. So you see this, like one material, we save $50,000, mix of inventory, discounts, and so on. So you would think that it is a no-brainer, right? But actually, when you collaborate with corporates, what we have seen is there's 1,000 different questions. So one of the biggest one is, how will this fit into my current landscape? Can I not get it already? What is it? What is it that makes it unique? And that's, I think, what Peter has mentioned before. It's very difficult to say you're unique because maybe you reduce inventory, and there's 200 other companies which reduce inventories, but maybe you're complementary, right? You can reduce inventory in many different ways, like better sales planning, better replenishment planning. Both can reduce inventories, for example, and
Yeah, I
and
have a question.
also
Yeah, I have a
ERP
question. Yeah,
connection is a
no,
challenge.
yeah, but you
Yeah,
are. I think your secret is you're so well connected to your ERP environment. When I look at a lot of companies, they have their MRP settings within their ERP installation on default since the last 10, 15 years.
yeah,
So they haven't checked it, with lead times and minimum order quantities, that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
getting inside that engine with your Genlot, I think that's the real secret, because when you get this data out and you make it accessible like you are presenting like here, then you'll highlight where they have missed an opportunity to set the parameters on the right way within their ERP setting, that kind of stuff. So, and then write it back into ERP, then you get this kind of result. So I think that's the secret of what you are presenting.
Yeah, it's a complete automation. I mean, also we're
Yeah.
looking at parameterization like safety stocks and so on, but
Yeah.
this is also a positioning question, because as soon as you talk, optimizing safety stock, there is maybe an O9 or there's some other software which does it as well. So, and if it's not your core business, you have maybe a big advantage there to offer, but you don't mention it in the beginning, because otherwise you get kind of in a procurement list, in a big table, and we will never do the same scope that O9
No,
does, right?
no, but I think O9 is replacing SAP APO. We all know that SAP APO will be faded out, so a lot of companies are looking for replacement either by O9, Kinexis, OMP, and the likes. But I think you are in a more a plug-in or a plug-on area compared to these other behemoths of O9 and Kinexis. That's my take. How you position yourself?
For sure, very niche, yeah, but
Yeah,
with high
yeah,
impact, or that's
yeah,
what
yeah,
we
yeah, yeah,
hope.
yeah. And maybe you can explain it with these two live examples.
Yeah, exactly. So AB InBev is the largest beer producer in the world with over 60 billion in revenue.
Hmm.
And there basically is, in the collaboration, we were at the right time. So they had an internal tool for order planning they could easily enhance with our API only offering. So we built basically a custom API for their internal tool, which was on top of SAP, right? So the integration in the current landscape was very easy. And we basically added intelligence to their order planning. So when to order how much. As you mentioned before, the problem was with several $100 million in inventory in Brazil, and we were able to reduce that by 20%. And also because the suggestions were better, there was much less manual intervention by the planners thereafter. So that was kind of a nice side benefit where we could increase automation, right? And maybe on the other hand, on the other side, just to show how big the difference is, Merck is a biotech site in Switzerland, so very high quality control costs for each delivery. So there we reduced the number of deliveries by 50%, and also quality control by several millions, right? And scrap management, but this was also as you mentioned, a lot of things are managed maybe a little bit in an old school way with Excels, which get emailed from one place to the other. So part of what we offer them as well is kind of better batch management and expiry handling, which can be done through a user interface which is modern. So that's what the planners there like. Whereas in AB InBev, we don't even have a user interface. So it's two pretty different examples.
Yeah, but
of
I think
collaboration.
as a company you have to recognize in this kind of cases that it looks similar to you or not, and that's the basic point. Peter, you like you said, you have done a lot of interviews. So can you give some reasons why multinationals should work together with with startups?
Yes, of course. And I think a couple of the things we already discussed probably, but it's maybe good to just give a bit of a summary on what it is. And most of all, of course, it starts with a vision and about innovation. So typically, a startup has an idea or a vision, which is often very appealing for big organizations, and it solves a problem that they're having, like we were showing in the other slides.
Hmm.
The second thing is, so what we said is that very often a startup doesn't have, let's say, a product that's totally finished yet, so it's still in development. So that gives also the option for a big corporation to do co-creation or co-innovation, basically. So you still have the option to define what you want to have, and very often the majority of these big organizations that we talk to is still pretty low, so they can also learn while doing it together with a startup.
Yep.
I think the third reason is that typically when a startup starts, the team is still pretty small, and there's really a tight combination between the company who is asking for a solution and the founders and the team. So it's a very, very tight cooperation with a lot of support also coming from the startup, which is at some point of time sometimes even feeling like a part of consulting, actually, if I look at some of the interviews that we did.
Hmm.
Then another thing is the price model. So typically these startups use a SaaS model, which is interesting from price perspective, which reduces a lot of risk. You do not have to buy an expensive solution, and very often we also heard that it's also easy because you don't have to go to all the hoops to go to all kind of steering commissions and to ask big budgets, but you can actually start doing stuff without kind of investing a lot of money. Then, of course, there's together with the co-creation, a lot of speed and flexibility to do things and to change things. And last but not least, what we also saw is that and I think Simon, that was even also mentioned by you guys. So you have a lot of sector knowledge that can really help to solve the issues that these big corporates are having. So it's a combination of innovation, way of working, pricing, and kind of how to do stuff.
Yeah. And do you have any practical tips for the users, for the supply chain practitioners?
Yeah, so also we got, let's say, some good input also from the interviews. So I think kind of the starting point is that this is for a lot of organizations a bit of experimentation. So you need to have, let's say, that openness and trust together with a startup, and it's not first time right very often there. So and that's fine, as long as you have built in kind of a fast improvement cycle, meaning that if you do something, you should iterate into getting the best out of the step that you took. The second thing is, a startup can come to you, of course, with a very big dream, but they're not there. So it's not all the time about dreaming about the end state, but every time take a pragmatic step forward to actually, in smaller chunks, get to that dream. Then another thing is, and that's quite interesting what we have discussed already earlier during this webinar is, there's a lot of innovation departments, let's say, within big organizations, but kind of what we saw in the interviews that a lot of time is just kind of a bit of a coincidence on how a supply chain manager comes into contact with a startup. And that means that you really have to start as a supply chain manager, have to understand the solution that you're actually are going to buy. So that's really about testing, trialing, proof of concept, but also overthink kind of what you want to achieve, basically. And then last but not least, and I think, Simon, you also mentioned that, so this solution at the end, although it's easy to start and maybe it's cheap, it should in the end also fit in the IT architecture. So you really have to make, let's say, a fast connection to the IT department in your organization to make sure that what you are trialing, that it also in the end fits into the IT strategy that your organization is having.
Yeah. Thanks for the summary. We're almost at the hour. We now have 2 slides. Basically, I think you only recognize when you see it. So as a possible user, as a supply chain practitioner, you have to stumble upon startups. Yes. So that's why we created our Innovate Supply Chain event in May, and that will be held in Amsterdam on May 22nd. And basically, I invite startups, and I will approach them later. Next month, early February, to enter the competition. So there is a contest for startups and scale up, and you can win a marketing budget. So we're gonna help you to put yourself on the market, on the map. So basically, the benefits are, you get in contact with possible customers, supply chain practitioners. You also get in contact possibly with the investors. So that's 2 of the members of the jury, also Matthias, is on the investment side. And you can also learn from other startups. What you've seen in the last editions of Innovate, it's quite nice to talk to other startups, because sometimes you are in a silo on an island, figuratively, and to get a better understanding what they're facing, and you will see, you can learn from each other, approach, etc., and that kind of stuff. And finally, before we get to the Q&A, we have a few minutes left. So these are the 4 criteria: commercial opportunity, level of innovation, practical applicability, and clearness of message. These are the things the jury is looking for the finalist and the winner of our supply chain startup contest. So we have a few minutes left, 2 minutes left for some questions from the audience. So feel free to ask questions right now, and I will otherwise. And afterwards, we still have some opportunity to have a further conversation with the 4 of us in the virtual lounge. Back to Matthias. So you see the landscape changing. Do you expect that that the market will still thriving in the supply chain startup area? Of what is your expectation for this year?
Yeah, so I think the picture is a bit mixed here, but so I think all in all, there will be more founded companies in supply chain and logistics going forward. That's something we are very convinced of, because it's a huge area. It has a lot of challenges. It sits on a lot of data. It's had a lot of participants and interfaces, etc., etc. So there will be more in terms of interesting companies started in that space. To a certain extent, it will also be difficult, especially for the later stage companies that have raised a lot of money and maybe not have generated the traction they wished for. So they will have a tough time to attract new funding this year, as long as they don't have a solid growth story. So that will be a bit more difficult. So we would also expect to see some more later stage companies maybe fail or doing M&A as an exit. That with also there will be also kind of tough situations. But all in all, I think this is really a strongly growing segment still.
And have you seen a lot of companies pulling the plug lately in the startup phase?
So more than in former years, not maybe former years were not the right benchmark, right? But so I think there are a lot of more kind of bankruptcies or done fire sales of companies to kind of corporate partners. It's not that a lot of them give up, and also a lot of investors are still kind of financing these companies and helping them to develop. But for sure, so times are getting tougher, and I think that's it's a normal thing in innovation and supply chain also, with a lot of startups being started over the last years. So there will be more companies failing, obviously, also when there are more companies started, and that's a normal thing to a certain extent. But it's not so it's not a wave of bankruptcies as many of my investor colleagues also kind of predicted earlier earlier last year, I would say. So not yet, at least, and I hope it's not coming.
Okay, all right. Like I said, so we are out of time, but there's still another 30 minutes we can talk to in this virtual lounge right after this. So there's some further reading. So you can have this startup matrix from last year, and the new one will be published later on in February. There's a link to the report, supply chain tech report from Matthias and colleague, and some interesting information. At the website of Peter, and there's a nice article from Simon, how not to collaborate with startups. That is a nice read. So with this, I would like to thank you, Matthias, Peter, and Simon for participating. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And I would like to thank the audience for listening in. So I think, I see a lot of applause, so that's nice. So thank you for listening in, and maybe you will watch the recording. And I would like to say, maybe I will see you next week when we have another webinar about Gen AI and supply chain planning. Also very interesting. And maybe I see you right after this in the virtual lounge where we can have another conversation about startups in supply chain. Thank you for now, and say goodbye.